man. Revolutionized the live chat, breakdown some of the best MMA content in the business today. Of course, one half of Morning Combat with fellow legend BC. He joins us now to preview UFC 307. The one and only Luke Thomas. Welcome to Submission Radio, man.
Thank you for having me. That's a very generous introduction. I would say I'm not many of those things, but I am still alive and I am here and I'm honored to be here. So that's the good part.
All right, man, let's get on to UFC 307. There was a bit of hate for UFC 306 with the spear, this and that. And you spoke about
all of it fucking dumb. I mean, well, that's not true, right? Okay, let me immediately correct that. The ticket prices were high, and yeah, the card was not as good as it otherwise could have been. These are fair criticisms, right? We talked about it the last time I was on, but I don't know. I don't know how you feel. I did not feel like after the fact that the amount of criticism it got really matched ultimately what the product ended up being. So we should acknowledge that up front.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool, and I'm happy they did it. UFC 307, though, a lot of hate coming in now with the card this coming weekend. How do you rate UFC 307 as a card?
Not great. Not great. Not great. Yeah. I mean, listen. Okay, so let's talk about the good. Let's talk about the good. Because there is good, right? We would all agree that there is some good to it. Poatan is back. Hard to be mad about that. It's not a fight that it was in any kind of high demand, but it's in all likelihood not going to be a bad fight, right? It should be, whatever it is, it should be full of action until it's over. So that's good. I don't really love the co-main event. I don't know who would. However, you've also got Kayla Harrison on the card as well. So you're at least getting some movement in that division, I think, in the right direction. So that's pretty good. I do like, I think did they move Jose Aldo to the main card? I think they did, right?
Yeah, he's on the main card, and Buckley and Thompson, I think, are on the prelims.
Okay, and so also that Joaquin Buckley and Wonderboy fight, that's good matchmaking. That's good matchmaking. Given where Buckley has been, given where Wonderboy is, this is appropriate matchmaking. But like the bad is there isn't really one fight on the card at all that features either, I mean, I guess with the exception of Poatan, but there's no fight on the card that features star power in two directions. There are barely any fights that feature star power at all. You have, men's 205. Again, Poatan's in high demand, but this fight is not in high demand. There's no demand for the co-main other than it's a title fight that you have to move. And the rest of the card is kind of filled with some interesting at places fights. But again, nothing, there's no rivalry. There's no grudge match. I know Juliana Pena's trying to make it one with the co-main, but that's, we can all kind of tell it's pretty manufactured, right? And that might work, but it's not, there's no genuine two people. Like, for example, and not everything can be this, but Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria are on a collision course, right? I mean, there's gravitational pull on both of them towards the other guy. There's none of that here. Like, you don't have a rivalry per se. You don't have major star power per se. You don't have a particular bout that like had to happen in MMA, for us to be really excited. I do think I like, by the way, I like the Bautista Aldo fight. I like the Buckley Woodley fight. Those are good fights. And again, and particularly in the Buckley Wonderboy case, I do think it's good matchmaking, but these are not like essential fights that you just really have to see that are very, very important for their division. It's just a lot of like good to decent to, important by virtue of the title implications, at least in the co-main event. And it's at altitude, and, the top guy on the card is facing the number 8 ranked contender. Like, there's a lot of not so great about it.
Yeah, it's interesting with Stephen Thompson. He was on the show and he was kind of like, hey, that would have been a great main event for like an Apex card or one of those cards. And I kind of agreed with him. And I also feel like you're giving away a fight for free that I think like at least that gives you something for your dollar, I guess, if you're buying the pay-per-view. But let's talk about Khalil just quickly, man. He's had a bit of an interesting career in the UFC. A lot of ups and downs since his debut in 2016 on The Ultimate Fighter, which, by the way, was a loss. How would you kind of describe his career? Because I guess for a lot of people, they never really thought he would have even sort of made it to this contender title shot position. There's been some really impressive knockouts, and then there's been some less than impressive performances as well.
Shaky at first, especially from in the late teens. I know the debut was 2016, I think you indicated.
Mm-hmm.
Right around that time, he was kind of up and down. I don't know if he was 50-50, but it kind of felt like that. He'd win one, he'd lose one, he'd win two, he'd lose two, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just never got a sense of like if he was coming or going. He did, obviously he stood out when he had the Gokhan Saki win, but I think there were some losses after that. It's more recently that he kind of became something a little bit different when I think he's now 5 wins in a row, something like that, 5 wins, most of them coming via stoppage. And what ended up happening, it seems like, is he was trying to figure out himself, figure out his game, and nearly quit the sport around the time of the pandemic when he was living in Thailand. And then just kind of came back with a narrowed but renewed purpose. And when I say by narrowed is, I'm not, he always had concentrations of skill. He was always kind of a striker first kind of thing, but he just became like unencumbered by trying to live up to some kind of identity, unencumbered by trying to do this for any other thing other than want or like individual purpose. And along the way, his game kind of solidified. He was able to lean, I think, a little bit more into the brutality of what he can do. Like the Carl Roberson fight's like a pretty good example of that, but not the only one, like him holding his fist. Was that the Anthony Smith fight where he's like holding it up like this, like he's about to drop
crazy.
Drop an axe. Like he became a much better version of himself. And by the way, it's kind of interesting. Like we're coming off the heels of UFC Paris, right? And, Hanato Moicano had a good performance. And there's something kind of interesting about a certain kind of guy. Now, Moicano might end up fighting for a title because he actually has done really well. But there's these guys who like never reach it. But when they get to like their mid-30s, you really begin to see like, the coalescing of their game come together and understanding their purpose, understanding what the assignment is, where they're best, where they're not. And you really start to get the best out of them. I don't have the age of Khalil Rountree up in front of me. Perhaps you can look it up and tell me. I think he's close to 35, right around that. I feel like he's coming into a similar
34. He's 34.
Yeah. Yep. He's coming into like another moment like that. So these last 5, you've really kind of seen somebody show a new level of vitality, a new level of violence, quite literally, a new level of understanding. But like, it's not because his overall game has all of a sudden improved. His striking has gotten better, obviously, but it's almost from like a recentered sense of self, a recentered sense of purpose, and that is delivering, I think, a degree of calmness or let's say focus and intensity in a fight, and the results kind of speak for themselves.
It's interesting because it's hard not to look back on some of his previous losses, like the Johnny Walker fight, for example, right? And be like, all right, this is a guy that really struggled in the clinch against Walker and ultimately got taken out. And against, obviously, Alex Pereira, the clinch is something that might be a part of it. And then looking at him, like you said, as a kind of a newer fighter at 34 with the new kind of skill set, but like refined skill set. But speaking of what he has to do to win here, what do you think is the game plan for Khalil? Because this is the thing, right? You can't really move forward against Pereira without really paying for it. We saw Izzy, he was great at sort of setting up traps for Pereira. Even that time when he took Pereira out in that last fight for Pereira at middleweight, it looked like he was in a bit of trouble before that happened, right? Like you have to put yourself in the fire in order to take Alex Pereira out. And Khalil isn't like a wrestler or anything, so he's not going to be trying to wrestle there either. So like he's going to have to strike with Pereira, but how does he do it in a way that it gives him the most opportunity to sort of land something and have some success?
One thing to note, Johnny Walker's very tall. And so the clinch is, and obviously he's a very good athlete, despite sometimes he fights like a donk, but he is a good athlete.
Yeah.
And so, the clinch can sometimes be a very good weapon for him. But if you actually go back and you watch, for example, the Khalil Rountree, Dustin Jacoby fight, they don't clinch for very long, but to the extent that they do, it's actually Rountree who gets the better of it in the end. So something to keep in mind there, like he's, there's different ways in which you can be a good stand-up fighter. The clinch is almost like a mix between striking and wrestling and like a singular position. And he's gotten significantly better at that too. I'm not saying he's going to lord that over Alex Pereira, but to the point that you raised, he got finished off in the clinch. I think it's actually become something of a strength for him. Whether it'll be a strength against Poatan, we'll see. Here's the best thing I can say about this. Listen, I don't know what the odds are, but I'm going to guess that Poatan is a significant favorite, right? Mm-hmm. This is the 8th ranked guy in this division. He's not even in the top 5. He's a good fighter, not a great one. And I'm not, this is not in any way me trying to be disrespectful. I think we have to reserve the word great for the guys who really do, exceptional achievement. And by the way, if he beats Poatan, we can revisit this conversation, right? The best weapons that Rountree has are, he's got a vicious right hook. He stands southpaw, so this is going to be an open stance fight. I mean, there could be some stance switching along the way, but in general, it should be an open stance fight. And so, he has a great right hook, and he's got a great left straight, and he's got a good kind of dip down over the top overhand left. And he throws them with intensity. He throws them with absolute purpose. He throws them regularly. He puts them in combination, left straight, right hook, left straight, or overhand, then hook, whatever. I mean, all the different kinds of ways you could mix it up. I don't know how much the jab will be a factor. There might be a way for him, because they're going to have both of their lead hands on the same side. There might be some way in which the jab is affected, right? That is something as well. But here's what I think. He doesn't really move forward or backward all that much. You'll see it a little bit. If you go back further in his career, he does it a lot. I'm talking more recently. He doesn't really pressure people. He doesn't like cage cut hardcore. He kind of just stands in front of them. A little bit of movement here or there through the pocket, a little bit of like leading if someone's really backing up on him, but he's not a hardcore pursuer or a hardcore evader. He mostly, for the most part, just kind of stands there. And he's just going to slug it out with Alex. What I would say is, and he probably will not win doing that. But listen to the words I'm saying, probably. You might be asking, what's his best path to victory? He throws heavy bombs. He's going to be standing right in range. Some of those are going to land. Could Poatan make a mistake? Sure. Could he land one that Poatan doesn't see coming? Because Poatan kind of stands a little tall, right? He does do that. I mean, he was able to get caught by Izzy for doing that. Like, those are not the likeliest things that will happen. But, dude, MMA is crazy. I saw St. Pierre get slept and tapped to strikes against Matt Serra. I remember watching that fight being like, what the fuck did I just watch? Dude, it happens. It absolutely happens. So the smart money is obviously on Poatan, but you've got a heavy-handed guy who's going to be standing right there in front of him, a vicious right hook, a great left hand. He doesn't jab much. He throws everything else with intensity and often in combination, a good inside kick as well, a good inside low kick, sometimes to the body as well. Some of those are going to land. We shall see. We shall see.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing with Alex is there's a number of factors people don't realize. Like, the guy fights hurt a lot because he's trying to fight as often as possible, because he's at this point of his career where he's trying to make as much money as possible. You never know exactly what he's walking in there with. And also, he does take shots, like he said, sometimes in order to land shots. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. If Khalil does do this, right? If he is able to stop Alex Pereira, and I know, like, you're going to get annoyed at me because it's like the greatest upset of all time. Like, people love to say the greatest this, the greatest that. But you mentioned the Matt Serra GSP thing. How high up would this be for Khalil if he's able to beat Alex Pereira and knock him out here?
So it's hard to say it's Serra GSP level, in part because I think the odds would be even further. But it's got a little bit of that. And what I mean by that is Poatan is as hot as he's ever been, really, as a combat sports fighter. Obviously, he was very decorated in glory, but I don't know how much acclaim he had. Now he's got acclaim, and he's working on his second. This is a defense of his second UFC belt he's collected. Like, this is the high watermark of his career, no doubt about it. You add in, how did Matt Serra get the title shot against George St. Pierre? Well, he got it by winning the Ultimate Fighter, and part of the reason no one thought he had a chance is because the guy he beat to do it was Chris Lytle, who was not a chump, but not at all a chump. He was a very good fighter. But if you go back and you watch their contest, it was not great. And both of them would tell you it was not very great. Like, it was just not, it was really nip and tuck. And, it was kind of that one guy eked it out. And so, you were like, oh, the winner of this is going to fight St. Pierre. They're going to get fucking massacred. And then he goes in there and just, he knocks him out, or had him tap to strikes. And so, you have a guy who, there's no Ultimate Fighter component, obviously, but like, how far down in the rankings is he? At eight. This is like shocking for a guy this low to get it. So, of course, it's not nearly as analogous. There are many, many differences, but in the sense of celebrated champion and sort of pivotal figure in modern MMA, goes against someone fairly low, relatively speaking anyway, in the rankings, who most people don't think he has a shot. The odds makers don't think he has a shot. And then he goes in there and let's just say upsets. It couldn't beat that one, or it certainly couldn't beat Holly versus Ronda. But should it happen, it would be significant. It'd be maybe the biggest one in that division ever for a title fight, right? So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, me and Casper were there for the Holly Ronda one, and people just went crazy at the Telstra Dome or the Etihad Stadium or Marvel Stadium now that it's gone 56,000 people throwing chairs in the air. Just quickly with Alex Pereira, Luke, what do you think the future holds for him? Because I find it interesting that he keeps talking about now feeling like he wants to go back down to middleweight. We see this whole Dricus and Alex Pereira thing. There's a rivalry building there. His coach Morn said that, once Dricus is done with Sean or whoever the next person is, he wants to fight Alex. Do you think that's next? And do you think Ankalaev is partly the reason why Alex is interested in going back down to middleweight? I mean, we have to see what happens with Ankalaev's next fight, but is he trying to cash in as many fights here as he can? Maybe thinking that Dricus would be maybe a more favorable fight to him or a bigger fight for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right. The guy's 37, I think. So he also knows, like, while this is his peak time, no peak lasts forever. And so he's probably just trying to squeeze in as much as he possibly can, given the constraints. But I hate that fight against Dricus at 185. I mean, hate's a strong word. I would take it versus not getting it at all. But given a choice, the 205 version seems to me much better. I mean, I just don't know what kind of version of Poatan. Like, what's the point of getting Poatan at 185 if he gets clipped with a shot and has no chin because he's so drained? Like, why the hell would we want to waste our time with that? That seems, I don't know, it just seems less than ideal. Whereas Dricus can easily make 205 and still be, I think, quite the threat. And you've already got him up for the belt up there. That I don't know. It seems to me like Poatan probably wants to keep that 205 belt and be like, oh, I'll just go back to 185. And if I lose, no problem. I still have the 205 pound champ. Whereas if he loses, he's beltless, right? So if they go at 205, and I guess the Ankalaev thing, we'll see. Ankalaev still has business to attend to later in the month in October. Obviously, if he wins that, then he seems like he's going to be the guy. But Ankalaev has donked it up a few times, man, where I thought, okay, this is the moment. This is the moment. Ankalaev is going to settle into this role. And you're like, wait, he had a draw against Jan Blachowicz? You know what I mean? Like, so let's see. Let's see how that goes.
Who would you lean towards if you thought about Dricus and Alex at 205?
I mean, probably Dricus, maybe. Dude, it's so weird. It's like Poatan has definitely exceeded my expectations, but hasn't done anything like fight to fight where you were like, oh, I didn't think he could do that. Right? You know what I mean? Like, against Jamal Hill, it ended that way. You're like, oh yeah, right. That seems right. Or against Yuri in the rematch, or even before that one, or pick whatever fight. That there's nothing that's ever there's no fight where he's ever done something where I'm like, wow, he did something I never thought imaginable. Whereas Dricus has done that a couple of times. You know what I mean? Like, he finds ways to win. He's such a tank, and he's such an opportunist when it comes to available offense or lapses in judgments of his opponents that he gets these amazing results. And so it's really I mean, maybe other people feel differently. I personally have a very hard time getting something right about a guy that I've been like wildly wrong about before. So I would say, like, I mean, let me just tell you what, like, my initial instinct was to say Dricus. Is not because on the feet, like, do I think Poatan would feast on him? Yeah, I do. I feel like if they stood on the feet, just all that blitzing and shit at 205, I feel like Poatan would be able to light him up. But the takedown component to me is kind of interesting. Like, Alex definitely keeps going up against guys who are not genuine takedown threats, who don't really put like chain takedowns together. I mean, I know Prochazka got him down in the first one and kept him down for a little bit, but he's not really a dynamic wrestler in that particular way at all. And not that necessarily Dricus is, but Dricus has a way to like get underneath, get to the back, drag you to the mat. He can take your back. You can see he can finish from submissions from there. He's got pretty heavy ground and pound, depending on it. Like like there are certain weaknesses that Poatan would have in situations that Dricus could take him to. So, but this is what I mean. It's like, oh, on the feet, Alex wins. On the ground, I feel like Dricus would have his way. I feel like if you have that equation at 185, it still is true, but the vulnerability that Poatan has both on the ground and even on the feet, given how drained he is to make it, it makes it less interesting. It's far more of a toss-up to me at 205 versus 85, and for that reason, it should be there.
Just quickly before we move off this fight, obviously you did great boxing coverage. I saw Alex say, if Dana White wants to get in the boxing game, he's the guy for Dana, right? Like, so he's throwing his hand up for another opportunity. How do you think Alex's striking translates into the boxing ring, right? Because he is more of a kickboxer, sort of Muay Thai fighter, where he doesn't have that much head movement. He will take shots, but at the same time, heavyweight boxing isn't the same, I suppose, as some of the lighter weight classes too. So he could find some success. But how successful do you think he could be if he moved over into boxing?
I don't know what most MMA fans think about the chances of MMA fighters in boxing. I tend to think that they don't have much of one, even at heavyweight. Dude, even at heavyweight, like, let's go down the list. Obviously, he's not beating Joshua or Usyk or Fury. Wilder is beyond washed, so, you know, that's maybe he could win something like that, but then Buckley, he's not winning that one. Big Baby Anderson, he's not beating. Miller, he's probably not going to beat either. Although that's a little bit more debatable. Ruiz, certainly, I don't think he would beat. Like, you know, you're not talking about him. Like, could he get some wins against some like respectable professionals? Probably that. You know, I think of anybody, he'd make a decent account of himself. And by the way, he does slip punches a little bit. He does stand a little bit tall, but there have been times where, you know, especially when he's pressing and he's anticipating reactions, he'll get good slips off to the side. But I just don't think, yes, heavyweight is also, you know, not boxing's greatest division in general. But right now there are a lot of like pretty good fighters in that weight class. And also, just as a general observation, this is less specific to heavyweight, I really don't think people understand how good boxers are among MMA fans who don't, let's just say for the ones who don't watch boxing. Like, you got to understand something. Like, how many times have you seen an MMA fighter leave MMA and then go make a world team in wrestling? Never. How many times have you seen a guy leave MMA and then go win a world title in boxing? Never. How many times have you seen him even leave MMA to go win a world title in jiu-jitsu? And I don't mean like masters, which I'm not trying to like denigrate DJ at all. Like, it's an important achievement, but that's not like what they consider to be the actual champion. That's like for the older guys division. That's what the masters means. It means you're an older guy. Like, you don't see that either. And those are two very adjacent sports to one another. Boxers grow up, for the most part, obviously there's tons, again, at heavyweight especially, this is some differences, but in general, these are guys that have been doing it since the single digit age with a developed amateur system. They have so much refinement that the naked eye or the untrained eye just does not see. They have a certain amount of accustomedness, so to speak, to the process of training, to the process of fighting, to go in 10, 12 rounds, that MMA fighters are just, it's such an uphill climb, even for ones as good as Alex Pereira. So, you know, it'd be fun to get guys like Bud Crawford to fight in MMA. We could all see just how tough MMA is and how he's got a wrestling background. I still think he would struggle, you know, and we all know that. We never want to get to see it because of the economics in play. But I just feel like there's a lot of folks who don't really understand, because we see it all the time. These MMA fighters will go from MMA and then they'll go box and they'll be like, oh, this is so much easier. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. I talked to Chris Algieri about this. Chris Algieri was a kickboxer and a boxer, and he told me like going from one to the other was like a completely different universe. You think it's less weapons, and it is, but then this new offensive reality opens up and a defensive reality opens up due to the specifics of that particular combat system, that if you don't have experience and you worked on the skills related to those specific things, you're going to get lit on fire. And that's why you see MMA fighters go and try and box, and they look okay, but eventually they just get run over.
Hey fellas, do you want your grooming routine to be a one and done deal? Well, the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your private parts are over. Thanks to our friends at Manscaped. They're coming up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 to 6 Introducing the Beard Balls bundle featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger trimmer for the moneymaker, and another one for the boys downstairs. Get 20% off and free shipping now with the code word submission at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code word submission at manscaped.com. And fellas, real talk. I'm about to talk to you out there, the guys that are about to go on their dates, or the guys that are about to go in the gym, or the guys that are about to just go into work or do whatever life things you need to do. There are certain things you need to do to take care of yourself. Manscaped has you sorted, if you know what I mean. With the 20% off with the code word submission and free shipping today, the Ball and Beard bundle will make sure that you accomplish whatever it is you're trying to do out there. What about NordVPN? It is the ultimate VPN out there. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, you can go to nordvpn.com/submission. Now, our link will give you an extra 4 months on the 2-year plan. That's right, an extra 4 months. And there's absolutely no risk with the Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is down below, or of course you go to nordvpn.com/submission. What about NordVPN? You can watch your sporting events, TV shows, films which aren't available by your region by switching your virtual location. You can protect your private data like bank details, passwords, and online identity. You can switch your location anywhere to save money by purchasing cheaper flights, hotels, subscriptions. And what about the threat protection feature that protects you from viruses, malicious malware, and phishing sites? It's the fastest VPN in the world with no buffering or lagging. Premium cybersecurity for the price of a cup of coffee per month. And one NordVPN account can be used up to 10 devices. That's right, 10 devices. Go to nordvpn.com/submission now. Get the deal. Try it risk-free. It's one of the best apps in the game as well. nordvpn.com/submission. Support this show so we can provide more interviews for you throughout the next few months with nordvpn.com and Manscaped now. Now back to the program. Let's talk about this Pennington. Let's talk about this Pennington-Pena fight, man, and just the division in general. It's interesting because, maybe not as much anticipation for this one. People are sort of also wondering, is this the fight to make? Should they have sort of pushed up? Should they have sort of pushed up Harrison there to maybe make it a little bit more exciting? But she's on the card as well. It kind of seems like a lot of stuff will be figured out here when it comes to the division. What are you expecting from this Pennington-Pena fight? And also when it comes to Harrison, are you anticipating that, that we see a big presence from her, obviously with a big win, and then maybe cage side, getting that octagon, trying to secure the next shot, kind of getting people a bit more excited about the division?
Yeah, I mean, I think Harrison is going to be trying to win, and then when they put the microphone in her face, there's just no doubt in my mind what she's going to call for. I'm next. Whoever wins, we have a date. Like it's going to happen. So there's no doubt in my mind. Like, now, obviously, if she gets upset, then who gives a shit? But I tend to think she won't. I tend to think she'll, in all likelihood, she'll win, and that'll be that. In terms of this fight, as like I mean, it's like I don't even want to you have to give honest analysis to the audience, and I will. Mm-hmm. But I'm just trying to stress, like, I'm really not trying to be. We should back up a step. There's lots of misogyny in the combat sports world more generally, of which certainly MMA has its fair share. But it is very fair to notice right now that the women's game is in decline. At a bare minimum, it's in decline in terms of like noteworthy rivalries, big names, memorable performances. Now, there have been some, obviously. It's not to say that it's like collapsed. That's not my point. But, at the heyday of Ronda, Kat Zingano, Miesha Tate, Holly, and there's other, you can go into other directions as well. Amanda Nunes, of course. And Cyborg, like all of it. There were memorable performances, memorable rivalries, storylines. There was just a little bit of juice. And I feel like a lot of, maybe a lot's a little strong, a noteworthy portion of that has been erased. And this fight to me just feels a little bit emblematic of that new reality. So like Juliana Pena, I think, is going to inject a little life in the course of fight week into this bout, which is why she was, in my judgment, selected, because she's coming off of a loss to Amanda Nunes, and a pretty one-sided one at that. But you know, she'll do a lot of talking, and that's kind of fun. But like, she has no collision course like aforementioned gravitational pull to the title or to even Raquel Pennington. And you know what's interesting about Raquel Pennington is she's gotten some good wins recently, and some of them have been very close, but she keeps finding like a nip and tuck kind of way to just win in advance, win in advance, win in advance, win in advance. And I have to tell you, I have great respect for that on its own terms. Plus, remember, she didn't want to go back out in the 5th round against Amanda Nunes, and her corner was like, yeah, go back out there. And then she got walloped, and it was a big controversy. But I didn't know if she was ever going to recover. Plus, she had that. Remember, she had like this terrible bout with COVID, and she had that like 4-wheeler accident or whatever it was. Man, there's been a lot of roadblocks in her career that should have prevented her from ever being here. Just being here as a champion and winning in the way that she has is commendable. Like, I make no mistake about it. But as like a general observation about the state of the game, you know, someone kind of winning and advancing as like the standard bearer of excellence for an entire division, it doesn't fill the average viewer with confidence about like this being a figure of great transcendence that's going to like stand the test of time. Pena's here because she can just roll a grenade into the press room, and you know there's a value to it. But you know, what is the meritocratic claim for her being here? It's quite limited. You know, what do I think about this fight? You know, it'll probably be an okay-ish fight, but between the rivalries and like there's not really young contenders coming through and smashing people, there's a little bit of difference at 115, obviously. Excuse me, 125. You know, you got your Blanchfields, and I know Suarez is at 115. Like there's some interesting names that are doing it in other places, but certainly in this division, it just feels like, you know, someone asked me the other day, like, do you think the UFC will ever get rid of it like they did 145 because of just how much there's just nothing going on? That kind of tells you the state of things, and it just kind of bums me out because women's MMA hasn't always been like this. It was like nothing, and then it grew to something, and it's kind of come back down a little bit, not to its original depths, but it's not maintained its position and that it kind of had in its heyday of the Rousey era and so forth.
Oh yeah, man! But like back in those days, that's anything that everyone would talk about. They were some of the most looked forward to fights, and for media, those are some of the biggest clicks. You know, some of the fighters there. I got to ask: do you think with Kayla, if she does win here, and if she can progress to potentially becoming champion, do you think her and maybe Nunes coming back in that whole rivalry? Do you think that's enough to sort of spark up a bit more interest in the division?
Definitely, that would do great wonders. That would be awesome. I think it'd be, you know, you've got the best judoka in American history, male or female, up against the greatest women's fighter of all time. That's pretty great. It's pretty great. But what I really think needs to happen is what you see when divisions are healthy on the men's side of the game, which used to happen more commonly. And you see, again, at 125, you are seeing some evidence of this, although, you know, obviously Shevchenko and Grasso fighting over and over again is somewhat hindered that. But what I really want to see are young contenders coming through and smashing. That's what I really want to see. And Kayla Harrison sort of represents a little bit of that. We all know she's much more senior due to her Olympic experience, and she's been fighting MMA for quite some time. I think she's nearly at 20 fights by now. So she doesn't quite fit that same argument, but it's something kind of similar. But you know what I mean? Like, who's doing in the women's game what like Shavkat Rakhmonov is doing? And of course, not everyone can be Shavkat Rakhmonov, but that's not really what I'm arguing. You know what I mean? I'm arguing who represents that boogeyman threat that's just bulldozing through. For a while was Blanchfield. She had a bit of a hiccup against Fiorot. We'll see what Suarez can do, but you know, her injuries have kind of slowed her down even when her return was made possible. And there's some other figures as well, but you see what I'm getting at? Like, I don't know if I don't know if you agree or not, but this is what the ultimate sign of health is that, you know, you've got like who's the number one guy or number one lady in the division, and you can't quite tell. So you get these like really important, intriguing matchups, plus these surging contender figures. I always say this: what's the most interesting time in a fighter's career? A lot of people are going to tell you it's when they're already champion and they're fighting other people to maintain their status. And certainly that can be true. But for me personally, what may be my favorite time of a fighter's career is I got to watch the beginning and end of Khabib Nurmagomedov's career. I got to watch John Jones, every one of his UFC fights from the word go. It's when they come and like you hadn't heard of them, and all of a sudden they're just beating people, and then like, okay, but he can't beat the next one, and then they do, and then they do, and then they do, and then they do. And it's this like runaway freight train. Connor's rise is sort of emblematic of what I'm talking about at the highest level. But these people who just come bulldozing through, that would tell you things are going right for whatever division that fighter was in, and then in particular for the game itself.
Yeah, man, like Izzy, Alex, a lot of these guys coming in doing that. I totally agree with you. Like Mike Tyson back in the day in boxing is a good one. Like you just watch how long can these guys last against Mike, So someone like that would be amazing. And hopefully the division takes the right turn. And they really, I think, because they're sort of putting all the chips of the division on this card. Like they're kind of being like, all right, like we're really hoping, Harrison can go out there, have a really good win. This Pennington Pena thing isn't too like a good fight, so people could get excited, and so hopefully things work out for them, because it can always go the other way. Like you never know. Like Harrison can go out there and lose, and then Pennington, and then it could be, and then it's like you're in a worse position than you were in initially. So it's a big gamble, and I think people that are paying the money are expecting things from it. But we'll see what happens. Let's just quickly finish out. Obviously, you mentioned Aldo's on the card. There's some interesting fights. Holland, the lead's A, but let's just finish out a Wonderboy, man. He's fighting Buckley. It's on the prelims. The guy's 42. He's had an incredible career. For me, Wonderboy is one of those guys where when you go back in time in the UFC, it's like you had your striker versus your wrestler. You had your boxer. You know what I mean? The different sort of skill sets when one fighter is so good at that one skill set, he's able to dominate in that. And we don't see that as often because everyone trains the same and everyone has a different defense for your arm bars and your triangles and all that kind of, and your takedowns now. So the overall skill level is a little higher. But it's incredible how 42, Stephen Thompson is still a guy that no one wants to stand with. Is still a guy that can implement his striking. Even with the fact that he's older and this is a lighter weight class, he still has some of the speed and the movements that he had, which are incredible because he's largely, his stance leaves him open largely for counter shots and all sorts of stuff in the standing department. How do you rate his career going into this fight and the fact that he's still going strong at 42 years old with the style that he has?
I don't think folks really appreciate how special it is. So I'm going to throw a name at you and let's see if you can tell me if you remember him. Do you remember Jeff Newton?
Never heard of him, Luke.
All right. So he fought at UFC 56 against Sam Hoger. Sam Hoger was coming off of, maybe that was his first fight off the Ultimate Fighter or like one or two after that, whatever. Like this was right around that time. And Jeff Newton, you can go back and watch that fight. It's on Fight Pass. His nickname was the Karate Kid. He didn't have the same exact like point fighting style, but he had like karate was the leading element of his striking, and like of his background. And we've seen, for example, MVP have similar kinds of success. But when you really notice it, like MVP is within that world and his ability to adapt is pretty special. Like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson coming from a point fighting karate background. There's different kinds of karate and they all have different realities. And, I'm not suggesting that all of them are the same. Jeff Newton's, I don't think is necessarily like identical to Wonderboy's. What I'm trying to say though is what you have to understand is there were guys who were able to make their way to the UFC at various points who were not like, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, I'm a wrestler guy, I'm a Muay Thai guy. They were able to bring a little something different every time, but a lot of them lost or never made much of a name. And they weren't ever really able to put Taekwondo or karate or something like that, one of the more traditional martial arts that kind of faded from relevancy as MMA ascended. And then everything was just jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and Muay Thai. And what I really give Wonderboy a lot of credit is did he win a UFC title? No, he got pretty close a couple times, obviously, but he was never able to ultimately do it. However, to me, within the UFC lore, like no one made karate more relevant than him. And it's not that everybody was able to then copy him. That's not exactly the point that I'm making. But Anthony Pettis, after Wonderboy's ascendancy, or right around the same time, but maybe a little bit later, was able to show, yes, he can strike and he can wrestle a little bit and he's got some jiu-jitsu, but he had a Taekwondo background. And you were able to see some of that, and he was able to make like Taekwondo relevant for modern MMA purposes. So I'm not making the point that Wonderboy was first, nor am I making the point that he was the only, but rather he was one of the most important figures to me in making folks reconsider. Now, wait a second. It is true that wrestling is important, maybe the most. It is true that Muay Thai is important, and it is true that jiu-jitsu is important, but it is also true, and something that's kind of lost in today's game is that the beauty of like very different individual styles. In some ways, to me, Wonderboy was a reminder of the way that MMA used to look when you had much more distinct fighting styles, because he was able to take something that was seemingly not fit for MMA's purposes at all, and then retrofit it and have a significant degree of success for a long period of time. I think that is an important contribution to the UFC's history, to the evolution of MMA, and I think we're all richer for it.
Yeah, man. I remember every time I'd watch one of his fights, I'd go into the training room trying to kick people in the head like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And my coaches be like, what the hell are you doing? And then obviously, like, I got counted and hurt a few times, so it didn't pan out. This fight, though, as we finish, him and Buckley, great fight, like you said. Like, I agree with him. I think it should have been a main event. Like, it would have been perfect for one of these cards where they don't even have enough fights to really get people excited. But the cool thing is people can watch him on the prelims for free, I guess. How do you see it going?
I mean, we kind of know what the score is, right? So if memory serves, in the case of Wonderboy, his last 3 losses are what? Bilal, Gilbert Burns, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Like, and how did Rakhmonov finish him? Rear naked choke from the back, right? So I believe that's right. I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Yeah.
Buckley's got one of the best KOs in UFC history, if not the best, like in terms of like pure, beautiful KO. He's got maybe the best one ever. And it's not to say I don't think he can't strike with Wonderboy. At 42, Wonderboy is like his ability to absorb a shot is going to be diminished. His lateral movement is going to be diminished. You know, there's going to be a lot of factors here that are going to be working against him. So I think that it's not to say that Buckley can't do that, but Buckley's going to have to pressure through kicking range up against the fence. And I think it's going to be mostly like a takedown or bust kind of thing. And you saw that in Buckley's last fight where he had like a sort of tall, rangy guy. Not that his game is similar to Wonderboy's, but it's, you know, he had to go up against the guy who was lankier and taller than him and then wrestle that one to the ground. He was really able to do that. It's going to be a function of to what extent can Buckley get through past kicking range into punching range, and then really pressure Wonderboy backwards, corral his movement, and or get the takedown. I don't know what the odds are on this one. I still think that that one's a little bit of more of a coin flip to me. More well-rounded Buckley, better experience by far Wonderboy, beaten better guys by far Wonderboy, but Wonderboy's also fighting Father Time. Hard to fight 2 opponents at once. That's going to be an interesting one. That's what I mean. Like, actually, the matchmaking on this one's pretty good.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch it, man. And, you know, like Wonderboy, he's still trying to get back in the rankings. And you know what? With the win over Buckley, he's back right in there. And who knows? He's got some fun matchups there. Who knows what could be next for him? But as we wrap up, guys, make sure to follow Luke Thomas at Luke Thomas News on social media. Dude, you've been killing it with the live stuff. Absolutely killing it. And if people haven't subscribed to your channel and jumped in the member section and become a member yet, this is the time to do it. You're a little bit like Wonderboy, although obviously you're in your prime, but I feel like you're at the top of your game, man. You're always at the top of your game. But some of these live chats, what Luke does is he'll actually start his live chat as the fights begin. You'll be there for the main event. You'll sort of react. I've seen you do it with the boxing recently with that Joshua Dubois fight, which was incredible. So people need to subscribe to your channel and check out some of this hot new content. And of course, Morning Combat with you and BC always slays as well, man.
And hey, as a reminder, I think by the time this airs, you'll have a little bit of time left to go vote for a Morning Combat on the World MMA Awards for best MMA programming. Please go do that. And of course, thank you as always for having me on.